This is part 2 of my Míle 1200k ride around the provinces of Ireland. Day 3 starts in the province of Connacht in the Republic of Ireland and then crosses the border into Ulster in Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK. Along the way, I will share my thoughts on Irish reunification, which has been made increasingly likely because of demographic changes and Brexit. Now this is a camera, so don't be shy, okay? I know you love a good camera, and I love pointing it at you.
You got the good side. The good side.
No, I don't think that's the good side. I haven't found one. Okay. Day 1 of the Míle 1200 was a 234-mile ride in mostly rain to County Clare. Day 2 was another 210 to Enniscrone. Today's 188-mile ride takes us from the heart of Gaelic culture in the west of Ireland across the border to Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK. These longer rides are really about attrition and your ability to recover. Thankfully, the organisers of the Míle Fáilte made sure that we had nice hotels and food every night. This really helps, and so when we set off at 8:30 a.m, I felt surprisingly refreshed. The morning sunshine and spectacular scenery of Sligo also helped. The Míle Fáilte takes place at a fascinating time in Irish history because the likelihood of a vote for reunification is becoming increasingly more likely. I grew up Catholic in the Republic in the 70s and 80s. Back then, the troubles in Northern Ireland might well have been on a different continent, despite the border being only 3 hours away. The only real connection we had with the North was the constant drumbeat of shootings and bombings we'd see on the nightly news. As a child in the South, you noticed that the North was rarely discussed. However, even in the isolated and rural part of County Limerick that I grew up in, there was still echoes of the division of the island. For example, at our Christian Brothers school, we were not allowed to play English sports like soccer. Also, the few Protestant families living near us attended different schools and generally kept very much to themselves. In fact, there was a boy of my age a few houses up from us, who we were all fascinated by, but never actually met because his parents chose not to have him play with us. It's just a glorious day riding the country roads that hug the Sligo coast. You can even see across the bay to County Donegal's Slieve League, which are Ireland's highest cliffs. Also across Donegal Bay is the village of Kilcar, where my mother is from. She was one of 11 and grew up a native Irish speaker. County Sligo is also known as Yeats Country, after Ireland's best-known poet W.B. Yeats. He idolised Sligo, and many of his famous works reference the landscape here. Interestingly, Yeats, despite being an Anglo-Irish Protestant, was responsible for the Irish literary revival that started in the late 19th century. His goal was to construct a modern Irish identity rooted in folklore and Celtic mythology. His creative rebellion against centuries of British colonial rule arguably played a role in creating the environment for the actual armed rebellion of 1916 in Dublin. His famous poem, Easter 1916, addresses his somewhat conflicted view of the uprising and includes the famous and ominous lines, "All changed, changed utterly, a terrible beauty is born." This is the town of Sligo. My father, who was originally from Athlone in the centre of Ireland, went to Summerhill boarding school here back in the 1940s. Sadly, or maybe not sadly, the school no longer exists. We then make our way through the rural county of Leitrim, which is Ireland's smallest. It also was home to my favourite Irish author, John McGahern. He is particularly famous for his simple yet powerful prose that describe rural Ireland in the mid-20th century. Like a number of other Irish authors, his realism led to his books being banned, and he was even exiled to London for a period before returning to his farm here in Leitrim. As we approach the border, another story related to Northern Ireland that sticks in my brain is when I was 15, my secondary school took us across the border to meet with Northern Irish kids in Portadown. Back then in the 80s, people from the south only rarely travelled to the north. I remember meeting with these mostly Catholic kids. Both groups looked at each other with absolute fascination. It was like we were the same species but from different planets. Despite being from the same island, our accents in particular were very different. They also called us Free Staters, which was a term I'd never heard before. Of course, we ended up having great fun with them and in particular enjoyed their humour. Perhaps this Waterboys song is an appropriate way to emphasise the interconnectedness of the different communities on this island. Sweet Thing was written by an Ulster Protestant, Van Morrison, sung by a Scot, fiddled by a Dubliner, and was recorded in the west of Ireland.
The hedges first. Drink the clear, clean water for to quench my thirst. And I will watch the ferry boats and they'll get high. thing. Hell will drive my chariot down your streets and cry.
Northern Ireland and the border date back to the early 1920s. However, Ireland's turbulent history with England goes back many centuries. After the defeat of the Gaelic chieftains, the British Crown began the systematic settlement of Northern Ireland, also known as the Plantation of Ulster. Protestant settlers from Scotland and England were given the confiscated lands of the indigenous Irish. The 1916 rebellion in Dublin was the beginning of the end for English rule in the south. The treaty that ended the war called for the partition of the island, keeping the 6 counties of the north as part of the UK and guaranteeing a 2/3 Protestant majority for the newly formed Northern Ireland. This resulted in a deeply divisive civil war between the pro-treaty and anti-treaty sides in the south. After the treaty side won, the 96% Catholic South set about building a new state, the Republic of Ireland, while the now minority Northern Irish Catholics were left to fend for themselves. Fast forward to the 1960s, after decades of discrimination and political exclusion, the Catholics in Northern Ireland, who were heavily influenced by the freedom marches of Martin Luther King, began their own civil rights movement. This was met with a violent response from the UK government and the Protestant majority that ultimately led to the return of the IRA and the 3-decade conflict known as the Troubles. By the 90s, however, both communities were exhausted and ready for the 1998 Good Friday Agreement, which was brokered by the British and Irish governments and by the US Senator George Mitchell. The agreement has been an instant success and crucially includes a mechanism for the reunification of Ireland, assuming majority in both the south and north vote for it. This brings us to today. 2 recent events in particular make reunification more likely. The 2021 Northern Ireland census recorded for the first time ever that the once minority Catholics now outnumber Protestants. Second, the UK's 2016 vote to leave the EU, known as Brexit, which was not supported here in Northern Ireland, has had the effect of deepening the economic integration between the North and the Republic, which remains part of the EU. Northern Ireland, if you couldn't tell, is beautiful, by the way. Between Enniskillen and Omagh, the Míle Fáilte organisers brought us on this rolling, single-lane country road with grass down the middle. Definitely one of the highlights of the ride for me. The twilight thankfully seemed to last many hours, and although I was still feeling strong, I began to start seeing shapes. At one point I thought I saw a woman kneeling in the middle of a field. It turned out to be a solitary ancient standing stone, which is perhaps even more unnerving.
All your life, you were only waiting for this moment to arise. Oh, blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take your sunken eyes, learn to see. All your life, you are only waiting for this moment to be free. You are only waiting for this moment to be.
A number of the 80 or so riders independently mentioned a vibe change once we crossed into Northern Ireland. People seemed a little less friendly. It also surprised me that the roads were not as good. When I was young, the joke was that at least Northern Ireland, with all its financial support from the UK, had the best roads on the island. Perhaps understandably, people here seemed less open to outsiders. However, just like the rest of the island, the Irish are fundamentally a very hospitable people. A case in point is my friend John, who told us this great story. He was way off the back riding by himself. At around midnight he gets to this country bar called Eddie's in Greencastle in County Down. He was changing into something warmer when he was approached by some locals outside the pub. Initially somewhat suspicious, once they heard he was riding for a charity, they invited him into the bar and passed a hat around to raise cash for his cause. They even offered to drive him to his hotel in Armagh, which was still 50 miles away. He declined the kind offer and was sent off into the night with 60 sterling, a Red Bull and a banana.
All your life, you are only waiting for this moment to be free.
Perhaps appropriately, we end the ride in Armagh, which is the spiritual heart of Ireland, originally founded by St. Patrick in the 5th century. It's famous for having two St. Patrick's cathedrals facing each other from opposite hills, one Roman Catholic and one Protestant. Many thanks again to Audax Ireland. I'll publish part 3 next week, which describes the final day from Armagh to Wicklow in the province of Leinster.